welcome everyone to this DINCast. And today I'm here with two guests. I've got Sharon, that's Sharon Wilson, and Helen Gervain from Kynde Connect. So let me tell you a little bit more about what we're going to talk about. So Sharon and Helen are co-founders of Kynde Connect. And they both champion better support for parents caring for children with additional needs. And both drawing on lived experience of this. I know in Sharon's case, it's children with neurodiverse profiles. And also in Helen's case, it's a parent and a sibling of a child with additional caring needs. So it's great to have you both with us today, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And you may think, why this topic, particularly given that we've had lots of discussions recently that in the social housing sector, we're generally really strong at well-being and support. And in fact, we've been talking to leaders that feel we need to have a little bit of balance to some of that activity. But I was really drawn to this conversation because it feels really thoughtful, it feels really distinctive, and it feels it brings a bit of a different perspective and a different lens on what balance and support can look like in the workplace. And all in the spirit of achieving a great place to work, but also a place where people really thrive and really do brilliant work as well. So I'm going to kick off by asking both of you really, why this issue? Why is it not that visible in organisations currently?
So I think I'll start with that one if that's okay. I think it's SEND is only now special educational needs and disabilities. We're going to use the acronym quite a lot,
That's
so
okay.
much easier to say SEND. Um, has been quite a hidden sort of profile, I think, for many, many years in the workplace, but generally out in the public domain. But we
Yeah,
are noticing that there are more and more conversations happening around SEND. I think there are a number of reasons for that. So we've got some celebrities who are now coming forward to share their experience, some
yeah.
of them of their lived experience of having it, but also of parent caring. So I don't know if you're familiar, Anna Maxwell, Martin and Kelly Bright, they're currently sort of doing a lot of work to just explain what it's like to be a SEN parent carer and the challenges of navigating the system, whether it's for education or for health. And also just what it's like on a day-to-day basis, just how incredibly challenging it is. I think also we've got BBC Radio 4 is really I can't say that word, champion.
That's okay.
Um, they've got a podcast that's actually dedicated to Send now. It's called Send in the Spotlight. So just that in itself, I think,
Uh-huh.
speaks volumes of just how important it is for us to be talking about it. And then we've got the government is doing a big overhaul of the Send system. So there's a lot of media attention around that. So I'm hoping that will trickle through into the workplace as it's just becoming more visible everywhere else. And I think also researchers are starting to look into parent caring a lot more. So, you see, historically, there's been lots of research on autism, ADHD, as sort of conditions. But now we've got what's the impact for the parent carer and the parent carer at work. So one study found that it was 75% of parent carers either have to give up work or have to reduce their hours, which is really significant. And then of those parents that are working, about 80% of them are really struggling because of just the mental load that it takes. So they're really struggling to focus when they are at work. And then we read the highlights to be fair. We didn't read the whole research paper. A recent one by the University of Birmingham, in which shockingly it asked 750 parents for their experiences of parent caring, and 41% of them had got to the point where they'd considered suicide.
Wow. Oh.
That's how harsh the demands of parent caring can be. So I think this is something that we do really need to be talking about across all domains.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting, Helen, you saying about kind of the power of influences in that and people using their celebrity status for positive good in that, because we often talk, in the sector about the other side of that, where influencing is perhaps used not to the good. So it's lovely to hear a case where that's really helping. as well. Yeah.
And I think if I can add to that, Helena, if we think about why this needs to be visible in employing people, if we think about that research and the impact on our employees at work, the cost of replacing colleagues who leave,
Yeah.
the impact on employee engagement because of poor mental health, the impact on customer service and productivity, and that's not to mention that paying attention to parent carers is a fabulous addition to DEI initiatives for all of those reasons, even if it isn't a protected characteristic at this point.
Yeah, yeah, really good point, Sharon. And I guess that broadens out. You mentioned that impact on colleague engagement. That'll broaden out not just to the colleague impacted, but the colleagues around them
Absolutely.
as well. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. And perhaps focusing on that colleague experience a bit. Helen, what kind of pressures do you think colleagues face when supporting children with additional needs or when they've got neurodivergent profiles? And how does that show up in day-to-day life?
So, I mean, I can talk from my own experience, but also through my professional career as a Senko and working with lots and lots of parents of children with special needs. My
Mm,
experience echoes what I hear all parents experiencing is there's this sort of double load that you carry. So you have like the emotional side of things, which for me was guilt about being at work because my daughter's
right.
stress was so high when I was not with her. And I know this is the case for many parents, and I mean, that distress was her crying for hours when I wasn't there. I was her only safe person. And it wasn't like the toddler you sort of drop off and they cry, and then they just toddle off and play. It was sustained. I heard from caregivers that it was sustained. She would say that she felt sick the whole time I was not there, and she couldn't sort of focus on anything. And that's really hard because you're wanting to be at work and doing your job, but you're also feeling that guilt and that pull to be,
Yeah,
with your child and supporting them. And then there's also just the kind of the practical load that being a parent carer can bring. I mean, my daughter's got a lot of medical needs, so I have had to coordinate so many different types of medication and medical supplies. It was up to 16 different things constantly having to manage
right.
all the time. And then it's the agencies that you're involved in. So most parents of children with special needs will be working with speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, potentially CAMS for their mental health, the Senko at school, the education system. Again, I had 17 different professionals at one point that I was sort of trying to coordinate. So it's almost like you're a project manager
I was just going to use
at
that word. Yeah,
home.
it feels like excessive project management.
Yes.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
you're then going into work and you've got that going on like in the background. And I know, as I said, it's not just my experience. There are very many different levels of it, but there's a lot. It's we talk about the invisible load of parent
yeah.
caring because nobody would be able to see any of that when you turn up at work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about that in terms of project management, as you said. I mean, that's a lot of to be connecting, and those organisations, for someone like me that doesn't touch on those very much, we know they're traditionally quite hard to coordinate and get hold of. And yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And Sharon, how might those pressures particularly show up at work and perhaps in ways that leaders notice, or maybe leaders don't notice because they're busy too?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the reality of it is, as Helen said,
Yeah,
often this is an invisible load. We talk about an example of kind of carrying balloons through a door. You can get through a door with a couple of balloons, and we all carry, a few balloons at any one
yeah.
time, which might be things going on outside of work for us. But actually, a parent carer probably is carrying so many balloons that they can't get through the door, but they do manage that. And I think, there's some things that managers can look out for, which are very similar to how you'd look to, things happening outside of work for any members of your team. But in the worst case scenario, we see parent carers being burnt out and have to leave jobs completely. And so we want to stop it getting to that point, or long-term sick leave. by having conversations with people about, what's going on for them, as you would anyway as a manager of a team. But some things that we talk about when we're doing some support for organisations are microsigns. So, does it look like someone might be checked out? Because a lot of times that probably could be exhaustion for a parent carer. So, as well as everything Helen's talking about juggling, a lot of us, our children need us during the night as well. So, sleep can be a real issue for us as well as everything else. But what looks like disengagement might actually be exhaustion. So how do we explore that with people? Is someone who normally performs well starting to miss deadlines? Are you noticing that someone who's normally there on time is turning up late at the start of terms, for example? Because there are many children who experience that stress going back into the school environment, which then impacts on our ability to get to work on time. Are you seeing someone having to take urgent calls, ducking out of meetings because, none of us want to miss the calls from these professionals because it is incredibly hard to get hold of them in the first place. So those kind of things, of course, there are many reasons for people exhibiting those kind of behaviours, but we encourage managers, leaders to know their people, as we know is great leadership practice anyway, so that they're more able to create that psychologically safe space for people to be able to talk about what they need.
Yeah, and going back to Helen's point about you, Helen, you were saying 17 different kind of agencies at one point. That's potentially 17, or even if half of those people need to ring you when you're in the workspace, it's incredibly difficult to juggle. Thanks, Sharon. Some really kind of practical things to look out for there as well. So thinking about managers and culture. Helen, how equipped do you think managers are generally, from your experience now of working in organisations, to develop this awareness? How do you feel how equipped they are to have these conversations, to have the curious, to ask the curious questions, and what tends to make it difficult or more or easier for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think something we found in terms of one of the barriers is often that managers don't know who their parent carers are. So
Okay.
often a parent carer will not even sort of recognize that within themselves. And also, it's not a protected characteristic, so it's not something that maybe, would be brought to the fore. So I think that's one of the biggest sort of challenges to start with, is actually identifying who your parent carers are. We sort of see through development programs that how supporting parent carers is not part of the agenda. So often managers don't have that insight into how they might be able to support. I think there's quite a lot of fear around language and potentially saying the wrong thing and upsetting an employee or a colleague. I mean, it's in the news at the moment, sort of even like send, which we use freely all the time. Actually, should there be a more positive, special educational needs and disabilities? Should there be some other, phrase, acronym for it? And I think people can worry about that. Um, and I think yeah, I don't know. Sharon's probably better placed to now, sort of talk more about the challenges and also
Yeah.
what we can do to take things forward.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
interesting, your point there, Helen, about it not being a protected characteristic. And it's a shame if that's what's driving the focus. I mean, it's really important, all those protected characteristics, but it seems to be one that just falls outside. And it's a shame if because attention does get directed to no doubt stuff with that label. So yeah, Sharon, what's your understanding about the kind of why this is so it's important to understand this for organizations, for perhaps performance, retention, and really building healthy cultures. Because one of the things we're saying in social housing is, as I said at the beginning, we're great at support, sometimes not so good at the high challenge. So where does this come into all of that equation?
Yeah, well, I think it's tempting to think if we don't see it, it's not a problem. And
Yeah,
actually, our perspective is if this isn't supported, then organisations pay for this in perhaps more quieter ways through loss
yeah,
of people or greater sickness. And so for us, this is about creating psychological safety, as I mentioned before. And we know that's essential for high performing teams from our leadership development research, etc. So this isn't anything different. But we also talk about showing up authentically for work. And what many parents feel is fear about speaking out, because of the issues and the struggles that they're facing. And a lot of us will have faced huge judgment from within the school system, from family and friends because of what's happening. And so we're also struggling about how we manage everything alongside, that fear of opening up, for fear of judgment. Um, but actually, all of us want to do a good job. It's not that we want to take carers leave because that isn't spent doing something nice like sitting by a pool on holiday. It's actually spent with
No.
medical appointments or, battling for something for our children as we advocate for them. So it's actually about enabling performance in ways that work for individuals and for teams. And the only way to do that is have the conversation about it. So there may be small things that are needed in an organisation, and flexibility might be key for someone. Let's take the example of someone whose child has real problems going back at the start of each term into a school environment. Actually, some flexibility in start time for that 1 week in every 6
Yeah.
might be a really simple solution for that parent to then show up without having had the pressure beforehand. And that's going to impact on their performance as well. So it's actually really about how do we help that stress dissolve or be mitigated to make sure that parent carer skills are retained, they can show up and do their best, because it's a really meaningful part of our lives to want to contribute to our jobs. It's part of our identity and it's part of how we role model for our children as well. But those juggles that we go through, if we can have the conversation about what might be helpful, then that's actually a really open culture that's created that allows us to give our best. And we do know, as Helen said, that, managers shy away from this for not wanting to cause offence, not wanting to say the wrong thing, but also, the organisational risk in getting it wrong. And therefore, the more we include this type of conversation in our management training and our leadership development, and just as part of our culture, the more that we will get people showing up authentically and be able to, co-create solutions that work.
I love that example you gave, because that's not about fixing a permanent flexibility. It's just about adjusting something for a week. Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah,
and it might be 1 week in every 6 because it might
yeah,
be the start of the term, or it might be just giving permission. I know that you're having to coordinate all of these medical professionals at the moment. It's fine if you have to duck out of meetings.
yeah.
That kind of thing can release that pressure really helpfully.
Yeah, great. So people aren't sitting there thinking about what if my phone rings. It's more
Yes,
about, I know if it am, but I can focus on the meeting while I'm here. Yeah,
exactly.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. And what really strikes me as well in this conversation is there are clearly going to be parallels here between what colleagues are experiencing in the workplace and what some of social housing customers
Yeah.
might be experiencing and tenants might be experiencing in and navigating in their lives. Yeah, turning to Helen, really, and from your experiences, what parallels might there be here for customers, tenants living in the homes of social housing?
Yeah, so I've worked across all sorts of demographic, and it's the same theme. It's a challenge to be a send parent carer. It's parallel. Your income doesn't affect that emotional, practical load that you're carrying. But I would say if you've got a reduced income or a lower income, it's even more challenging.
Yeah.
Um, so again, sort of referring to research, there was a study done in 2024 of 4,000 parent carers, and it did find that it is more expensive to have a child with SENS. So they found that, just refer to my notes, that the average extra spend per month was £322. And over a year, that becomes £3,864. So for
Mm,
some families, that's just not possible.
mm,
And that's when you see, and also you're seeing sometimes the costs going up, but your income dropping as you're having to reduce work because of your caring needs. And
Yeah.
for some families, that's led to, in the survey, and I've seen it, it's led to losing homes. It's led to not even be able to manage the basics. So having to sort of rely on food banks for food for the family. And then obviously not being able to pay for therapists and just relying on services. And then that load then it's just another load, isn't it, on top of that financial strain. So many, many parallels, but I think um, the empathy that we're sort of trying to encourage people to be sharing within the workplace also needs to be with the service user as well, because the
Yeah.
challenges are just so huge.
Yeah,
Mm.
adding to that the cost of living crisis and all the other pressures, and that heat and eat debate that very often we have. This brings a new dimension as well to that.
Mm.
So thanks for that. It wouldn't be a DINCast without me asking you if you could share some practical examples that organisations might want to take away, even if it's just to turn the notch just a little bit. And Sharon, I know you've already given us a couple in by sharing those examples earlier on, but if there's one or two practical examples, I'd love to ask you both that would realistically help organisations to do things better and support those parents who are juggling all of that better. Where would you suggest they start?
Um, so one of the really interesting things for us is, as Helen's talked about, when we talk to organisations, they often know or have carers networks, for example, and I'm sure many of the
Yeah.
organisations in this network will have that, but they don't know how many of those people are their parent carers. And so, one of the things that we would suggest, and we do with companies, is raise awareness of parent caring as a thing, because many of us actually take a while to get there of identifying ourselves as parent carers, because actually we're just parents, right? And we might be struggling and it might be really hard, but we're just parents and we want the best for our kids. So, therefore, we will fight and advocate for it. But understanding that others are experiencing the same kind of invisible load can often be hugely beneficial in itself. So we think once you start to get a grip on, are there parent carers in your workplace? Where are they? What kind of support might they need? Then that's really helpful. And also, many of your organisations will have really great provision in terms of employee assistance provision. They might have, paid carers leave, etc., etc.
Yeah.
What we would say is make access to those as simple as possible, because actually, if you are overwhelmed anyway and you're already filling out realms of paperwork for things relating to your child, the last thing you want to do is have a conversation with someone that then gets referred somewhere else, that then needs a form filled in, that then needs sign off. So if we can make those things as accessible and easy to access as possible, that could make a huge difference. And awareness that parent carers can access those as well would be really useful.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Helen, would you
Anything
add to
you'd add,
that?
Helen? Yeah.
Interesting, because I've got sort of a small little takeaway potentially, which is we sort of talk to people about the sort of questions that you might ask. So
Yes, thanks.
rather than sort of saying, "Oh, how are you?" perhaps you could say, "Oh, what's on your plate this week?" And that just opens up the potential for somebody to just share a little bit more. It's a very subtle difference, isn't it? But it could
Yeah.
lead to something much more. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, that would be just one tiny little
Yeah,
takeaway.
I keep kind of almost visualizing those 17 agencies, and that question in relation to that, Helen, would make, yeah, well, actually, I'm juggling 17 different support agencies or different organizations this week to, yeah, wonderful. I could carry on this conversation forever, but I'm just conscious of time. And I just want to thank you both for sharing those brilliant insights on this subject. And for me, it's made me really reflect about those sort of quiet pressures that people have and just hold, and they're not necessarily that visible. And then that raises for me just how important it is for leaders to take time to notice, and to ask the right questions, as you say, and then organisations to make small steps. So, and I really love that this is about understanding and enabling all in the spirit of great place to work, but also great performance, people bringing of their best and thriving at work. And what I'd really encourage DIN listeners to do after listening to this is to think about how visible or invisible this is in their organisations, and maybe look at one or two of those ideas to make some improvements. So huge thanks, Sharon. Huge thanks, Helen. Thank you very much.